About a record liability judgment for the death of a child in a Chrysler minivan. What was not widely known at the time, and what CBS's Anthony Mason now reveals, is how far Chrysler had gone to head off a costly and embarrassing safety recall of its best-selling vehicle.
This is where Sergio Jimenez died in 1994. This is how the 6-year-old South Carolina boy was killed. Sergio's parents say their Chrysler minivan was hit crossing the intersection. The rear gate popped open, Sergio was thrown out, his skull was crushed. The family sued Chrysler, claiming the rear gate latch was defective.
The latch can ride up and over it.
In October, the Jimenezes won the biggest judgment ever against an automobile company, $262.5 million.
The Jimenez case also revealed this series of confidential Chrysler documents that made a lasting impression on the jury. Critics say the documents portray a corporate giant ready to pull out all the stops to protect its most profitable product, ready even to manipulate the government agency that was threatening to order a recall.
NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, had already conducted its own crash tests on Chrysler minivans. Watch the result. On side impact, the rear latch failed, the passengers flew out.
This problem led to over 135 separate incidents of ejection, approximately 90 injuries, close to 40 fatalities.
NHTSA warned Chrysler that preliminary tests on its 84 to 94 minivan latches showed, quote, a safety defect that involves children. The alarm sounded at Chrysler. A government-ordered recall would threaten $2 billion a year in minivan profits. The company chairman, Robert Eaton, was warned in an internal memo, if we want to use political pressure to try to squash a recall letter, we need to go now.
Have you ever tried to squash an investigation?
No, sir.
When Eaton testified on videotape in the Jimenez trial, he didn't remember the memo.
Nor to my knowledge was there any activity whatsoever to squash a recall letter, because obviously we didn't get a recall letter.
Because you squashed it?
Definitely not, sir.
It's obvious that Chrysler will do anything to stop this recall.
Joan Claybrook is a former head of NHTSA.
They're willing to use political pressure or anything else to figure out how to stop the Department of Transportation from requiring them to recall these minivans.
So Chrysler went to Capitol Hill. A month later, another minivan latch memo to Chairman Eaton reported, quote, we've been working on a letter with Hill staff. In the margin, a handwritten note. Hopefully, this won't leak. But Eaton testified he had no idea what Hill staff meant.
But you know that the Hill staff are people who work for congressmen and senators on the Hill, right?
Very likely, but it could be some man or woman by the name of Hill.
In fact, it was Congressman John Dingell and Mike Oxley, whose committee controlled NHTSA's purse strings. Just as NHTSA was considering a Chrysler recall, the agency received this letter from the congressman pointedly challenging its recall policy. The letter questioned NHTSA's practice of making preliminary data public rather than waiting for conclusive findings. Written with Chrysler's help, the letter never mentioned the latches, but the congressman clearly intended to chill the minivan investigation, according to Joan Claybrook.
Dingell and Oxley framed their letter as a policy matter, but everyone knows that it's all about the minivan. These members of Congress wanted to stop a recall on behalf of one of their constituents, Chrysler Motor Company.
The congressman and Chrysler declined to be interviewed on camera. They insist the letter was only intended to address broad NHTSA policy and that they did nothing improper.
NHTSA Deputy Administrator Phil Recht, who received the letter, did agree to speak with us on camera.
I did not view this letter as any attempt to affect the outcome of this case.
But you felt no pressure at all from that letter?
It really had no impact on us.
Today we are announcing an unprecedented action.
Nevertheless, just 2 months after the congressman wrote their letter, Chrysler and NHTSA cut a deal. No recall. Chrysler agreed to replace the old latches, but on its terms, with no admission of a defect or safety problem.
They didn't find a defect because there isn't a defect.
Because you talked them out of it. Your company talked them out of it by saying to them, we'll voluntarily fix it. The deal will be no recall by you, and we'll fix it, right?
Objection.
Chrysler is appealing the landmark $262 million judgment. Meanwhile, 1.5 million Chrysler minivans with the old latches are still on the road. Despite 37 deaths and 40 pending lawsuits, Chrysler continues to insist those latches are safe. In New York, I'm Anthony Mason for Eye on America.